So, my mom says, tell Damir I say hi.
Hi, Mom.
And also she's like, Shadi, make sure you don't.
Cuss.
Yes.
Okay.
Because she's literally downstairs because I'm home again.
Yeah.
I mean, you know this, but I don't know if our listeners do.
Yeah. Okay. I'll
They
try.
know now.
They do. So, why does writing feel good? And here's an even a related one. I feel that the fact that writing feels good means that it's sinful. What do you think of that, Shadi?
Whoa, you're really coming out with guns blazing.
Guns blazing. I don't know. It's been on my mind. Like, it doesn't feel good. You know what I mean? It's like people talk about like working out as somehow, making people, it makes people somehow, I don't know what, makes them high. That working out never did that for me. Working out just always makes me feel terrible, which makes me think it's virtuous. Whereas writing, it's hard and not fun in the throes of it, but then it feels good, like in the way that people say running should feel after you've run a marathon, which must mean it's not it's bad, right? Because if the world rewards you with good feelings, like if you're, doing illicit drugs or something, it's clearly bad. What do you think of that?
Well, it's interesting you bring this up because literally I started. Remember this? It's supposed to be this big, grand, definitive essay that I've been hyping up for a while.
Yeah.
That may or may not ever get written.
Yeah.
So I tried my hand at writing the first paragraph earlier today,
and it felt good.
Yeah, I don't know if it is good, but it certainly felt good.
Right. Well, that's all you can ask.
It's probably a crappy paragraph.
How often do you rewrite?
I usually try not to. I usually try to write all the way through.
And then you just send it off to the editor and be like, here,
no, I mean,
you deal with it.
If I'm in a rush, I'll have a once over before I send, just to make sure everything's in order. I try not to restructure too much. I mean, obviously, I'll wait to hear back from the editor and maybe do some more changes after that. But on your bigger point, so
well, I mean, this is fascinating, and even as a smaller point, I mean,
really,
that's not how I work at all.
Oh, how do you do it?
Well, I mean, I don't know. So do you just like write straight through? So now you've written one paragraph and you won't revisit that. Maybe you'll look at it once more before you send it to the editor.
I'll just keep on writing. Yeah, I mean, so I don't usually do outlines. I don't usually have a clear sense of what I'm going to write before I write it.
Yeah.
For me, the key thing is just to be in the moment and to just, let it flow. And I'll maybe do some editing for each paragraph as I'm writing it. But I try not to go back too much.
You're a successful author. How many, when you're writing a book, how many words a day? I mean, I've heard my colleague Richard Aldous talk about, he's written several books and he's a historian and, he seems to be writing a new book every other year, more or less. And, by the time he's done all the archival research and he has it all mapped out, he says he gets up in the morning and he knows he has 1,000 words in him every day. And, just gets up, does it, gets those 1,000 words out. And then another trick I heard from him, I've never attempted this. It's to end in mid-sentence for the next day. And then,
that's smart.
Yeah.
Huh. Wow. I like that. So, well, keep in mind that there was a golden age of productivity in my life.
Yeah.
Book-wise.
Yeah. Well, I mean, tell me about it. We don't have, I'm not saying, unless you've forgotten, it's been so far in the past, you've forgotten what it was like. No, look, I mean,
I feel like I'm still productive, but I think book writing is a different kind of thing. Yeah. And, there's been a little bit of a gap. I haven't had a book out in the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. It just sort of hit me right now that I've never really promoted my book or my books on this podcast.
Well,
wow.
I imagine
what kind of monster? I'm a monster.
You're a monster for not promoting, or you're?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel most people that already know you are know you on the back of your book, right?
That's true. Yeah. So for that book, I wrote it's called Islamic Exceptionalism.
Yes.
How the struggle over Islam is reshaping the world.
In the
So
show
that came-
notes.
yeah. So I wrote most of that in 2015, and it came out in late 2016. And
What was the process?
I remember that I had this amazing spurt of energy and focus where for about 60 days out of 80 days in 2015, I wrote 1,000 words a day. And in those 80 days, I basically had a good chunk of the book. So 60 days times 1,000 words per day is 60,000.
Yeah.
So, like, when you think about it that way, you can actually get a lot of book writing done in a short period of time as long as you commit yourself to writing 1,000 words.
But
And,
so
yeah.
was it a spurt of energy and creativity, or did you just commit yourself to 1,000 words a day?
I committed myself, but I remember it being effortless. I mean, maybe this is me creating that narrative in retrospect, but from what I do recall, I remember it not being as hard as my first book, which I do remember as being a bit more of a labor to actually write it. And so it felt almost magical, like when you're in that zone and it's just coming out. And I remember feeling very good, and I was building momentum, and it felt like it was coming together pretty quickly. So that was great. And I think that because I remember that as being so effortless, it sort of raises the stakes next time around. That will it be as fluid as it was the last time?
Is that like a barrier? Like you feel like until you get in the zone, is that like psychologically blocking you a
Yeah,
little
well, I
bit?
mean, if I have to write something now, sometimes it doesn't come naturally and I have to force myself, but that doesn't feel great. And I don't know if that's what produces my best work. But, if you have a deadline, you have a deadline.
Yeah.
But I definitely prefer to be passionate about what I'm writing and to really feel, it's not like I was a vessel for some divine spirit, but which is how I suppose some like novelists have described, writing. Or maybe I'm just imagining that. But
No, I mean, I don't know, divine spirit or vessel, but I mean, it's more like the zone. I mean,
like
I
the
think,
words just come out of you.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're just
yeah.
there. And that's so the problem is, I think, in our line of work is that I don't know if you feel this way, but I feel sometimes that if I'm not enjoying what I'm doing or I'm not passionate about what I'm writing,
Yeah.
I feel like it's very hard to do things.
To do things outside of writing, or
No, to write.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah.
hard to write if you're not excited and passionate. And which is why I don't like writing things that I don't like writing about. I try to focus on, but I don't know. It's sort of, this is also a reminder that I almost never talk about my writing process publicly. I don't want to give away too many secrets.
Oh, come on, give them away to me. No one's also listening. It's just me and you here, buddy.
That's true. Well, actually, it's not. But yeah, but I think your original point is really interesting because is it sinful because we enjoy it?
I mean,
And-
you know me and sin. I really was kind of joking, but prompting you in any case.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I definitely feel very good after the fact. I mean, I do feel pressure when I'm in the moment, in the sense that every new piece of writing, there's a certain set of expectations there. I mean, you want to deliver something good.
Yep.
I mean, I can usually write something very quickly that is satisfying. But that's I try to hold myself to a higher standard. I don't try to just put out. I know a lot of people just, they have to write something on a pretty regular basis. They'll just sometimes put some shit out. Put some stuff
Yeah,
out.
Mom, come on.
Put some stuff out, whatever. I really try to avoid that. And that's also why, if there's a month or two where the spirit isn't moving me, I don't want to force it just because I have to get something out like at a certain time every month or all that. That said, with our newsletter, I suppose there's going to be some expectation of writing more regularly, but I can usually come up. But there I have a lot of freedom, and there's less pressure because it's me and you talking.
Yeah, no,
And-
I agree. Yeah, that's
I like
it's
that.
different, right? I mean, it has been a pleasant surprise how that hasn't yet felt like a burden at all.
Yeah, I didn't feel like any of the times we did the back and forth, I didn't feel like it was a chore or something that I had to get out. It was sort of like, hey, I'm talking to Damir, I'm just in written form, you know?
Yeah.
But certainly I feel very fulfilled after a bout of like a significant bout of writing. So if I've written, say, 500 words even, or let's say I'll end up writing 1,000 words tomorrow, after that I'll feel like, wow, I just wrote 1,000 words. That's good. That's a day well done. But I will also say that I enjoy the actual process of writing if I feel like I'm in that groove. So I mean, we'll see if that happens with this essay. It's turned out to be a bit of a struggle, but you know, I got to write it, and I got to force myself to write it at some point.
You promised it to your fans, after all.
Yeah, and also to an editor or two.
Yeah.
But I agree with what you're saying about working out. Working out I find very hard to do, even though before COVID started, I was trying to work out around twice a week.
Yeah.
That was a struggle, and that was about total dedication, because I hate the feeling of working out. I don't like going to the gym. I don't like sometimes, like, literally when I'm like lifting weights or whatever, I'll think to myself, this is one of the dumbest things in the history of the universe. I am literally at a place where people are going to lift weights because they want to feel good, when I suppose in human history people didn't have gyms. I mean, they fought in wars, I guess.
Yeah.
And they ran, maybe, I don't know.
Well, sure. For me, it's what I've never experienced is that mythological runner's high, that feeling of elation that you're supposed to get.
It's not real. It's made up.
I'm with you on that. I've never felt it.
Yeah, I mean, I did winter track in high school.
Yeah.
I don't know what I was thinking. That was terrible. What was I thinking?
You never felt it.
And I mean, I guess that you can sort of simulate a high whenever you really want to, in the sense that if you feel like you should be feeling a high, you can sort of start feeling it. You have to be in the right mindset, but it's not. Is it the act of running that that changes my chemical balance or some endorphin stuff? I'm skeptical of some of. I know the science is real. I just don't know if it applies to everyone in the same way.
I have to say, I mean, I've felt legitimately nauseous after real exertions. I had a trainer for a while who was really pushing me because I needed that, because both I just. I'd run. I wanted someone to like watch how I was doing weights and everything. And then like I hired someone who's like really just sort of, I said, all right, let's see this. I want to see what like, being pushed, et cetera, will do. Maybe I'll experience that. That was part of the experiment for me. Maybe I'll experience that sort of endorphin rush or whatever. I never did. I would stagger out of there dizzy often. And, then I was like, well, maybe I have my diet wrong and drink more water, etc. Maybe even if I wasn't just like feeling just so disoriented after those things, it was not a feeling of happiness. It was a feeling of just collapse, physical collapse.
Yeah. Well, what I think I do feel after the fact, even if I feel like a little bit tired or exhausted or whatever, there's really a sense of having gotten something done, which was really challenging. So independent of any specific feelings, you sort of do have this realization like, oh my God, this is one of the most difficult things for me to do because I hate going to the gym. And you feel like, wow, I can actually get things done if I really put my mind to it. I do have self-discipline on certain things, and that can be reassuring. And you're like, oh, I got something done, and you can kind of like check it off in your bullet journal or whatever. But of course, then the question is, why do we feel like we got something done? It's because you're supposed to go to the gym. We don't necessarily know. I mean, okay, so I lift weights. I'm not like a an expert lifter or anything, but it does help with toning of muscles. You can actually see some of the changes after you're working out for several months. And before COVID, I would look in the mirror and I'd be like, oh, so this actually does work to some extent.
Yeah.
But then the question is, why do we value that? Why do we value our self-image? What does it matter if my biceps are a little bit more toned, or if someone sees my biceps, they'll be like, oh, that's cool. Like, is that really important at the end of the day?
I mean, yeah, I guess. Depends on how you value it. I mean, I just loathed every minute of it, and I stopped maybe a year and a half ago.
Right, but why is any of this stuff important? Like, why? So
no, for
okay,
me, Shadi, it was basically I'm getting to be an old man, and I don't want to be, too sedentary because I'll die early. That literally was the logic. And then I was like, just sort of was like, I'm getting a professional to sort of help me to see me through this stuff. I never felt a sense of accomplishment. I always felt a sense of just complete exhaustion. And you know what else it would do to me? Just like going back to writing. This is the other part that I mean, maybe to your point about just how these sort of chemicals interact with different people in different ways. I couldn't get work done after working out. People they're like, oh, you need to go in the morning, and it just clears your head for the rest of the day.
No,
it made me stupid for the rest of the day. Literally, I was dumb the rest of the fucking day. Excuse me, the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I don't know. I really wonder if it's just some sort of like neurochemical sort of thing that I never positively reacted to this stuff. So after a while, I was actually timing going to the gym on days that I did not have to actually be productive in any other way, because mentally it did me no good. Whereas the received wisdom is, oh my God, after you work out, you're just so clear. Yeah, you can think. I can't, if I don't work out in 3 days, I can't think straight. I'm like, what planet are you from?
Yeah.
This is not me. Not
but the
at all.
gym is good. Yeah, so you're right about the short term. I guess, obviously, it probably goes without saying, we do think that working out will be beneficial in the long run.
Yeah.
The problem there is that's some serious delayed gratification if that's the only reason you're doing it. I mean, maybe people start to feel like genuinely better and more healthy like a year into working out or whatever. And I'm sure that happens more at an advanced age. Like when I'm in my 40s, I'll want to be, I want to get back to working out when COVID stops. Whenever that is. I'm not totally comfortable going to the gym right now indoors. Because I do feel like, I'm enjoying life. I'm enjoying certain parts of life too much. I mean, the Domino's pizza, which we've talked about.
Yes.
Gosh,
also, as loathsome as working out to me.
Well, and some people might know that I was doing keto for a while before, and then I stopped right when COVID started. So COVID starts, I stopped going to the gym, I stopped eating keto, I start eating Domino's pizza.
Yeah.
I order burgers twice a week.
But you can still flex biceps on Tinder, and it's totally fine.
Yeah, so COVID's really changed a lot of things, I suppose.
Yeah. We'll never be the same again.
Wow, this is probably either going to be like a sort of a cult classic of the podcast that diehard listeners really get into because it's the most non-political thing we've done, at least in this first 20 minutes, or it's like the least popular Wisdom of Crowds episode ever because people are like, wow, Shadi and Damir had literally nothing to talk about that day.
Well, I have plenty to talk about. And I mean, it's a shame we went on this. I'm still intrigued as an editor. You mentioned something along the lines of, people on deadline and, you have to write so oftentimes. And, I think for columnists, especially like multi-times a week columnists, I think it is a real challenge. I mean, you look at someone like David Brooks or Ross Douthat or, any one of those other people that I actually don't ever read. It's remarkable how frequently they are capable of being interesting, like that many times a week. It's a remarkable achievement. But, as an editor, I remember early when I first started at this sort of stuff, I'm not going to say who it was, but I got it's like slightly older than me, peer journalist. I, thought he was really a quite a smart writer, and he owed something to the publication I was working for, sent me something that quite clearly he was on deadline. He had promised it. He had poured himself a number of glasses of whiskey and just basically torn through this thing. I could almost smell the booze, like in the mistakes and the kind of weird stream of consciousness thing.
How do you know he was drinking?
I don't, but it was just terrible. It was just like it was such a mess of a piece. I would never submit that. And this just goes back to, I mean, I'm not saying that you submit that kind of slop. You certainly haven't submitted that kind of slop to me. But it's interesting that you say that you don't go back, because for me, my process of writing is, I don't know, I feel like I have to feel really good about it before I can hand it off. I'll share it with a few people for like sanity checks to say, hey, did I do something completely insane here? Just, can you look at this? Am I any like glaring blind spots or mistakes? Because that's one of my panics about writing, is that like, I've missed something so obvious and that it's right there. So I share it for that. Then I hand it off. And here's what I really am interested in, apart from, your more comfort at just being able to hand it off. How quickly do you disassociate from your own writing? Like, I submitted something this morning that I had committed to and I more or less made deadline. And I read it this afternoon and I wasn't reading myself anymore.
What do you mean you weren't reading yourself?
Like, I sort of remembered writing this, but it's not me anymore. Like it's
wow, that's interesting.
I disassociate from my writing like pretty quickly. And that's the weird thing about it that I find most pleasurable about the writing process is like, I feel it's difficult. I'm getting something out. Like it takes me a good amount of time to work myself up to the state where I can write. I can then write something for a while. And then I read it almost as if someone else had read it. I read it as if someone else had written it.
That's interesting.
And I'm just sort of disassociated with it. So I don't know. React to any of that. I'm just curious about process. To me, this is, you're right. Maybe it's not like mass interest stuff, but I'm just always fascinated about how people write and how they relate to this sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's actually good to talk about. I mean, so it also depends on the length of the piece. So as you know, I've been working on this book proposal. I'm doing a revise and resubmit for it. And that I really labored over, and I really wanted it to be perfect, and I thought a lot about structure. I moved things around. I got feedback. So the stakes are high with that. I mean, I want the book to go forward. I want to be able to sign a contract soon and all that, and I don't want to keep on, revisiting the process endlessly. So, I thought to myself, this is something where it does really pay to be as careful as possible. But if it's like an op-ed, you can't, if every op-ed you're writing, you're going to labor over it and think that there's some ideal of perfection, then it's going to be hard to write those pieces. Now, if it's a longer piece, you want to be, again, more thoughtful about it and all that, and put the required time. So it just, you sort of have to, like, how important is this? Will I have chances to revise it? Will there be other rounds where I can perfect it? Does the editor want to see it and shape it before, so you also don't want to be too laborious over something when the editor wants to have a hand in formulating it and shaping the argument. I mean, some editors can be more involved like that.
I don't think any editors want this. I think editors are forced to do this when they're handed a piece of crap. I mean, maybe I'm wrong about that. I've never really sought that out. I mean, if I'm going to work with someone on it, I want to be co-author. I don't want to be shaping necessarily.
No, I don't mean like intensely shaping, but guiding the. Hey, especially if it's a more like free form kind of thing. I remember that piece I wrote that was, a couple of pieces I've written recently have been a little bit more free-form experimental pieces, if you want to call it that. And that's where there was some help, in the sense that They weren't really. There wasn't a clear argument, and there probably wasn't a clear argument even after the editor involved himself. But at least he helped push it in a better direction where it was a little bit more cohesive. And that piece that I have in mind was not meant to have an argument. So when people say Shadi, the piece was really a really interesting meditation. But like, what were you trying to say? And we talked about this before.
Yeah, when people when I say, but yeah.
No, but I was like, yeah, there wasn't really an argument because I don't always have something I don't always want to convince the reader of something. I want to share with the reader what my thought process is, and if they can benefit from bits and pieces and they can learn something about how it's maybe perhaps self-indulgent, who knows, whatever. It gets to some bigger questions about what is the point of writing, what is the point of argument, is the objective to persuade someone to change their view? And you know how I feel about this. That's not really my goal in writing.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, so before we delve into that, is your theory of everything piece that you've now embarked on an experimental meditation, or is it an argument?
No, it's going to be an argument, but it's going to be pretty unwieldy and sprawling. I mean, I don't want to build up expectations too much, but I do sort of see it, if it goes well, as being my definitive statement on the moment that we're currently living in.
Do you ever get worried that like you've bitten off more than you can chew for an essay?
Yeah, this will probably be true for this one, but and that's where that'll probably be the case for this one.
Oh, so how do you handle that? Do you then like break it up as you do it? And because again, this gets back to the question of how one writes, and this is why. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have much insight into how I end up doing my stuff.
Do you remember this movie from a while back by Paul Thomas Anderson, Magnolia? Remember Magnolia?
Yes, I remember Magnolia.
Sometimes I think to myself, okay, there are articles, and then there are articles like Magnolia. Mm-hmm. Magnolia is a bizarre, out of control, wonderful film. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. Some people hate it.
Yeah, I just hate P.T. Anderson, but
anyway. Some people hate it. So, when like you're like, wow, I'm really in the zone. This is really going well, and you're like, oh, I can't wait for people to read this. But then you self-combust in the last third of the essay, and you just lose your shit, right?
Yeah.
That's that's what
again.
Yeah, that's what happens in the movie. That it's a wonderful movie, but then you're like, this is bonkers for the entire last third of it, and literally there are frogs dropping from the sky.
Yeah.
No, and that's not like a rhetorical lyric. Yeah. It's like literally what happens in the movie.
Yeah.
It's like Paul Thomas Anderson, he's like, this is so out of control. I have all these like ideas and they're building up into this crescendo, but I have no idea what to do to them. So you know what? I'm going to introduce a random plot twist that has no meaning where frogs start falling from the sky.
Yeah. I'm actually Googling as you speak. Wasn't that actually a remake of... So I don't think P.T. Anderson even came up with the frogs coming out of the sky, but I can't remember. Maybe I'm making that up. Screw it. Not important.
Yeah. So if you listeners want to just like search it from now, like if you do Magnolia frogs,
and add message Shadi,
different...
and add message Shadi that P.T. Anderson is not the creative here, that he's just stole someone else's idea.
Yeah. Well, Magnolia frogs falling from sky. Yeah. I think it's a reference actually to the book of Exodus.
Yeah.
So it's biblical. It's a biblical...
So it's not just random.
Yeah, he's like literally like plagiarizing the Bible.
Yeah, but I think he plagiarized...
As one does. But I think you're allowed to, right?
Yeah, I think it's a commandment. Thou shalt plagiarize the Bible.
Yeah, but sometimes I feel to myself, look, and this just comes down to a difference in philosophy. I mean, some people think that every article has to be tight and coherent and well edited. Sometimes and... Sometimes you want to go for Magnolia. You want to do the literary equivalent of the frogs.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever done that. I've never gone for Magnolia.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see if that happens here.
Yeah. You feel like you might be careening towards a Magnolia moment.
Careening towards the abyss.
The abyss. The frog-filled abyss.
But here's the thing, like I love it when I see someone, again, I don't want to, this is going to be way too self-indulgent. I don't want to pretend that I'm an artist and I'm like a painter painting.
But you'd like to
my
be,
great work of art.
But you'd like to be. You've talked about this, no? Don't you want to be?
Yeah, but look, this is what we do, right? And in some sense, it's an art form for us. We take it seriously. We value what we do, and we want to also. We want to be true to our art, I guess. I guess
that doesn't capture my sort of attitude towards all of this somehow. I guess, I don't know. In general,
but I guess what I mean is that I like it when I'm seeing an artist and I'm like, wow, I see their personality in this. They lost their shit and they just did something like bizarre or crazy or very idiosyncratic. I mean, what I love about your essays, Damir, is that there's like the full force of your personality. When you read a Damir piece, you know it's Damir writing it. It couldn't be mistaken for most others.
And yet I disassociate with it as soon as it's written, which is weird as well. I mean, I don't know. It's a weird feeling. I mean, literally, I was reading this essay I finished it at 8 a.m. this morning. And by 3, I read it over again after I'd already signed off on it. And then I was like, okay, all right, interesting. I'm not exaggerating that. That's.
But no one is tempering your voice. Like it is your voice,
right? So I guess part of the process for me is like managing that, is at least getting that onto the page somehow. But so I don't know. I'm not sure it's convincing anyone, as you said, that's the point of it. It's certainly not art, though. Not in my mind, anyway. It's more like, I don't know. It's a process of, I don't know, just sort of capturing a state of thought, right? And it's like, it's capturing a state of thought and like a bundle of insights and like a snapshot in time and making it coherent and accessible to someone else, including myself, basically.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I totally agree. I want someone to see what I'm thinking at a particular moment, that I'm sharing that with them, and so in that sense, you want it to be somewhat raw and rambling, because if that is an accurate representation of the jumble of your own thoughts,
sure,
then
that's honest.
There's something more honest about it. But I think that there's also this idea of the surgical precision of a well-made sentence that before it's actually going into the world. So let's say you shoot out that first draft, you looked at it very quickly at the end, but then when you go through it like 1 or 2 rounds with the editor, at the end you're like, okay, I do kind of want this to be perfect, because there is something about a special sentence. If you can and you can sort of appreciate that. I appreciate that in the writers and authors who have influenced me and who I still enjoy reading to this day. Like, one thing I've always appreciated is, wow, like that is some good prose styling right there. That that is a well-rendered sentence, and I can sort of savor that. I mean, that's what I think a lot of us found so appealing about Christopher Hitchens' writing. I mean, sometimes it would be overwrought and a little bit excessive in its verbosity. But, sometimes there were beautiful sentences, and you're like, wow, this is an artist. Where I feel like a lot of, and this is probably the case, I think, for most current American writers, less so with British writers, is that there's nothing distinctive about their prose style. Yeah. And it's hard. You can only know the author through the content, not necessarily through the sentence structure. Yeah. Or like the length of sentences. Like, a lot of American writers, they write relatively short sentences. I like long, multi-clause sentences where the reader gets lost in the sentence. My editors don't always like that.
Yeah. As an editor, I can tell you. So I don't remember running into that problem.
But you write long sentences too.
I do.
I like that though.
But
maybe I'm just weird.
No, but that's something I also go back and fix. And I guess, if one thing's changed the older I've gotten, is that now within the process of writing, I will end up lifting sentences and putting them in different places. Like, not after I've finished, like, look and rearrange some things, but like in the process of it. And so, coming up with like fun sentences and nice little sort of, internal alliterations and other sort of, I don't know, what I always think of as sort of jokes, like,
Yeah.
you're just sort of having fun and with the language and sort of amusing yourself and hopefully whoever else is reading it. I'm moving those around a lot more than I was as a younger writer. That is to say, like, they'll come to me, I'll put them in a place. I was like, that works, but it would work better here. And then I move it like 2 paragraphs while I'm only, 4 paragraphs ahead of that. So it's like, it's like a constantly iterative process for me at this point, Whereas I remember, one of the most sort of, I just like incredible experiences is was watching, when Walter Mead was at the magazine, like watching him write. And we could watch it because, oftentimes he would just write his essays into WordPress, the content management system for the website. So I'd just go in the back end and you'd see he's in there and you could like preview the thing. So you just sit there and hit refresh. And these like incredibly perfectly formed sentences create perfectly structured paragraphs that link to each other, and with almost no revision. He would do some revision, but with almost no revision would come out really well formed. And that's not me. That's not how I write at all. It's much more neurotic for me. It's just like I'm constantly going back, constantly fidgeting with stuff, but never having the stones to like do a single pass of an essay to like get the ideas down and then refine. Like I'm refining from the first word I write.
Well, this doesn't come as a surprise to me, Damir, because, some of our listeners might be aware of this, but there's been a lot of talk in recent weeks that you're actually one of the great American essayists of our era.
Well, thank you, Shadi.
I mean, people have said that.
Recurring humor episode. People are saying like when Donald Trump says, people are saying, it's usually Donald Trump saying it. Exactly.
But also, there has also been talk that you are the greatest Croatian American essayist of the current era.
Well, that's perhaps more appropriate, but probably also not true.
You're actually being like, you're admitting that you are the best Croatian American essayist right now?
I don't know. I don't know what Croatian American's writing. There's not many of us, Shadi. How many Egyptians in the world?
There are a few Egyptian American writers. I'm not the only one.
Right. But how many Egyptians in the world, period? Never mind Croatian Americans. But
like 100 million or something?
Yeah, right. There's like 4 million Croatians, period.
Oh, I forgot. Yeah, there's barely any of you.
Barely any. So there's like 5 of us and that can even...
How big is the Croatian American community?
I actually don't know. It's a good question.
Do you have any Croatian American friends?
No.
Really? Huh.
Yeah, I'm now, sort of doing more Balkan stuff in the last few years here in D.C. I've sort of reconnected to that, but it's weird. I had another sort of, I wouldn't say it's a rule, but I never fraternized with sort of people from the Western Balkans. Nothing, not that there's anything wrong with it, but just sort of never sought it out and never found real comfort in being able to, I don't know, just sort of BS with someone in a secret language that no one else knew. That said, that's changed. I mean, like it was, I think it was right after, in fact, after the last episode that we recorded with Christine, we noted in the thing, we went to a birthday party and it was on Ben Haddad's roof. And I think it was someone's, like a journalist at VOA, Ani's coworker at VOA from Bosnia, and I just start BSing with him in Serbo-Croatian and whatever. It's like sort of that fake familiarity when you find a stranger and like you can speak sort of, and so I don't know. Like 3 days later, somehow we're talking to Christine again, and she was like, "Yeah, you and your friend were like totally ganging up on me on such and such an issue." I said, "My friend, I don't know. It's the first time I met the guy. I don't even know his name. I totally didn't write down or anything like that. I have no idea." So yeah, I mean, I guess.
Who was it?
I don't know. I don't know his name. Bosnian guy at VOA.
Oh yeah. Oh,
remember up there?
Is it Adine?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Oh, okay. Well, so it's interesting because there's almost this raising of expectations when you find your kin somewhere.
Right.
So
It's awful.
they almost like, so when I run into an Egyptian, they expect that we're gonna start bonding.
Yeah,
And
I don't like that.
immediately they want to have like a conversation and have like shared in jokes, and like you guys are like part of this special group of people.
Yeah.
And I imagine that's the case for a lot of somewhat nationalistic cultures. I mean, there is this kind of Egyptian pride where we say that we are Dunya, the mother of the world, and
Right.
all this stuff.
Right.
And, you know, Egyptians are known, I don't know if it's true, for being some of the funniest people on earth. I mean, that's not been my experience, but
Yeah.
it is said.
It is said.
And
People
that is
are
what
saying.
people are saying this. And, you know, it's so, especially, like, also when you get, like, an Egyptian Uber driver and they realize you're Egyptian, then they want to like talk about Egyptian politics. And I can talk about Egyptian politics, but because, that can be a very divisive issue. So it's sort of like, oh, Sisi's really doing a good job. And you're like, oh boy.
Yeah, why would you ever be honest about that, though?
And then like the Egyptian Uber driver is like, oh, what did you think about the Muslim Brotherhood under Mohamed Morsi?
Yeah.
And then like, wait, do I,
I'm never honest with people like that. If people are like, "Oh my God, woke revolution's the greatest thing," I'm like, "Oh yeah." And if like you find some like Trumpy driver who's just like, "Oh
yeah," you're
and I'm like,
yeah.
"Oh yeah, sure, yeah, whatever." I don't care. I mean, that's just more generally like cab drivers. It's like this. There's another annoying false sense of intimacy that is just like, I don't know who you are, so I'm just gonna guess you the whole time. I don't care.
Yeah, it's like we're not gonna be friends.
Yeah. Unless your cab driver's called Mohammed. Deep cut.
Yeah. I mean, wait, did we talk about that on an episode before?
I don't remember. But that was your best point on Twitter. We'll put that in the show notes too. People can figure it out.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Oh man. Yeah. I also have a complex relationship with my identity and culture, as I'm sure a lot of us do. And part of it too. It's hard. It's hard for me. It hurts what happened to Egypt. It hurts.
Yeah.
And I don't always like talking about it because I don't want to go back through that history and be and I saw something really dark there, and I think I've mentioned this here and there on different episodes, but the military coup in July 2013, and then the massacre that happened a month later, the worst mass killing in modern Egyptian history.
Yeah.
I mean, does that affect how I view my country of origin? Inevitably, it does. I mean, I can't totally remove that from the history and pretend that people I know weren't implicated in supporting that massacre, including relatives and friends and people I knew. I mean, it's not this abstract thing.
Right.
I mean, you see when you see a kind of national hysteria, when you see people really losing their humanity, and then you wonder what that says about, I mean, culture is not static, and there is no such thing as, there's no reason to essentialize culture or say that anything is inherently wrong with the people. But is there something wrong with a group of people in a particular country and their numbers are large? Yes, sometimes that happens.
Yeah, but I talked a little bit about that though, about like sort of that mass hysteria. I mean, it's a nasty leap from, to sort of start talking about these things in moral terms, and it's difficult. But there's something very human about that too, right? And without being exculpatory about it, there's something very human about these kinds of political movements and this kind of, about politics taking on these sorts of valences that turn violent and bloody, right? I mean,
in some ways, it's one of the more universal things in human history. I mean,
Yeah.
every culture and people has fallen into some sort of hysteria where they do terrible things to their fellow countrymen. You just hope that there's less of it in the present day. Of course, this gets back to the issue of progress. Are we in some ways better where now we don't have to fall into this mass hysteria? I think part of it too is that it came so quickly after a moment of hope that I had been in Tahrir Square and seen a revolution. I was right there, and it was a beautiful moment. It was a special moment. I saw Egyptians really, they felt that they were taking some level of control over their own lives, and they were experiencing something they hadn't experienced before. And there was a goodness there that I saw. And of course, because I associate freedom and agency and democracy with goodness to some extent, maybe it's not always the way it is, but, so you see these very positive attributes, and you see people happy in some fundamental way. And I remember actually the night that Mubarak fell, I was writing something, I think for the Brookings website, maybe somewhere else. And I was in a coffee shop, and to get to the coffee shop that I wanted to write from, I was taking a cab through different parts of Cairo, and there were people dancing and singing and cheering, and they were gathering, and there was a kind of joy. You saw Egyptians being joyful, and I think that I never really associated that kind of joyfulness with Egyptians, growing up and spending summers there and living, a year and a half or 2 years over the course of my life. I don't remember seeing that joyfulness.
Yeah.
And then to see how that joyfulness could so quickly turn into something darker, I mean, that was a hard thing for me to fully absorb. And because it was like whiplash. It's not, did Egyptians change? Did their moral composition change just in the span of 2.5 years? Obviously, maybe in some ways, but that's not really... It tells us something about the fluidity of these emotions, and that, not to indulge in cliche, but, every human person to some extent includes good and bad. And unfortunately, the badness came out. And some of it is that, moments of political stress and also the experience of living under a dictatorship, I do feel, and I've argued this, so I'm not, hesitant to say it, but does it have a distorting effect on human nature, on the human person, where we become less of who we are and who we're meant to be as a result of living under repression for many years or many decades? I do believe that. It doesn't mean Egyptians are uniquely bad, but has the experience of authoritarianism from the pretty much from modern independence onwards has been almost continuously authoritarian, sometimes very stark levels of repression. Does that distort Egyptians and Egyptian culture and Egyptian political culture? Yes.
Wait, but
can it change? But can it change? Yes, it can change.
But hold on. I guess I lost you in one point there. Maybe. Presumably some of our listeners might have as well. The change, the people who were celebrating, and then the people who supported, the coup, one and the same people? Or
many of them were.
Many of them were, yeah.
Yeah, we don't know exactly the number.
But that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Never mind numbers. It's that on the one hand, people felt this joy, and then the same people were supporting the counter-revolution.
There were certainly some of those, yes, and
yeah.
I know,
and that's
some of them,
what you're conflicted about. That people would pivot on something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, have you in your excavations and investigations on this?
I understand it.
Have you had these sort of intense interviews with people that say yeah.
Some of it was quite literally within the family. My in the lead up to the massacre, I was there until August 12th, 2013. The massacre happened 2 days later on August 14th. And I was having these conversations a week or two before the massacre happened with friends and relatives, and especially my relatives. And they were very charged conversations, and we all knew that something was going to happen. And there was something very weird about being in this state of suspension where everyone knows that an unspeakable act is about to happen, but no one quite knows when or how bad it will actually be. Now, I think it turned out worse than a lot of us expected. I think, if 200 people were killed in broad daylight in one day, that might have been something that we get, it's crazy that you start to talk about like what's a level of killing that is something you expect versus levels of killing that are a surprise.
Yeah.
1,000 people, that's more than I think people would have predicted. But of course, the very fact that we knew it would happen. We knew that there would be loss of life, but we could just be like, we could just talk about it in a social setting with people you know. There's also something dehumanizing about that. There's something weird about that.
Yeah.
But I understand it, and like in my academic work, I do try to not give short thrift to why some people decided to support mass killing.
Yeah.
Because then, I don't think it's helpful to just condemn. I mean, that goes back to my philosophy and everything that I do. I mean, this was, to me, an unspeakable act that was one of the worst things that I could have imagined people I know supporting. But my job as an analyst, when I'm writing academically or writing from a more analytical standpoint, I think it's important to shed light as to how this came to be. It didn't come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
There were a set of things that led to this particular moment in time.
Yeah.
And otherwise good human beings are capable of supporting evil things. I mean, there's been a lot of literature on this. We know this.
Right.
I think that it can seem foreign to many of us Americans because we're not used to that level of primal bloodlust, but that's been a fairly regular thing in a lot of other parts of the world for even as recently as, I don't know, the 1940s, but even like Bosnia and Kosovo.
Oh, yeah, sure.
As in Europe, in the heart of Europe, as recently as
the heart. I don't know, small intestine. Maybe.
The small intestine of Europe. So look, I mean, we all know that this happens. We all know that people can support terrible things. It's an interesting moral question as to what that tells us about their moral state.
Well, what's interesting to me is that and again, this is at the heart of our podcast. See, listeners, you just stick through all the BS about working out. You get to good stuff. But like, it's at the heart of our dynamic, and I don't know, disagreement, whatever, is that I agree with all of that. I'm always puzzled, however, that your takeaway is a fundamentally much more moral one than mine, in the sense that my takeaway from even just hearing you speak and being woefully underinformed about even recent Egyptian history, is one of in fact just like not judging, which is in fact it's more of a state where I look at America and I say, as I've said before, this idea of like, my goodness, this works despite all of this somehow, because given everything, it shouldn't work. Given everything I know about human nature, it shouldn't work. And it's an acceptance of that kind of basic like fact of human nature. I mean, sure, bloodlust. I think that's not the right way to put it, but it's call it deep insecurity and an appreciation and a sense of that deep insecurity that leads people to support all sorts of things, that leads people to fall in behind all sorts of initiatives, that leads people to justify to themselves, and perfectly coherently, in ways that are completely consistent within one's own sense of self-worth and the rest of it. And so, yeah, sure. I think this leads me to be more, I don't know what, like, condemnatory, less, I don't think you're judgmental. That's not right, because you're similarly not judgmental. But do you know what I mean? Like, I as a result, though, I see the world as a much more I feel like you see the world as a tragic place too. And yet the difference somewhere, Shadi, is that and maybe it's the religious core, is that I accept the world in those terms, and am surprised if things go better, and am annoyed if people assume that things will go better than that. I guess that's like my point.
So there is definitely a tension in my own thinking. I mean, I guess at some fundamental level, I don't want it to be this way. The world is tragic, but I don't want it to be tragic. And I want to fight against that current of tragedy. I mean, some of it's also personal that, is there a part of me that wants the Middle East to be significantly better?
Yeah.
Yes. And is that completely unrelated to the fact that I'm of Arab and Egyptian origin? No.
Yeah.
I mean, that said, if I was some random white dude, maybe I'd care just as much, and I don't know. But I mean, do you have a certain attachment to a place? I saw Egypt as kind of my home away from home, my second home, if you will. I had a kind of attachment to it.
Did you spend time in Egypt before this? Would you go back as a child? Like
Yeah, we would usually go in summers. I lived there for a year when I was 4.
Oh, we're actually pretty similar that way, but like no more than like a year, right?
No, more than a year. Yeah.
Well, and I never I wasn't there at all during the times of troubles back in the Balkans. I was comfortably ensconced on Long Island watching. I remember watching the whatchamacallit, the market mortar attack in Sarajevo and just seeing body parts and blood all over the place. But and then hearing stories from family. My dad actually went using his UN papers behind sort of occupied Serbian lines and rescued my great aunts with the help of a guy who's actually here in Washington D.C. Long story, really interesting, but. Yeah, I mean, at the same time, yeah, it's funny getting back to the question of sort of how one relates to one's compatriots. I've said this to you before. I feel like my personal pose to the Balkans has always been that when I'm there, I'm kind of an American. And then when I'm here, I've always been this like weird Slavic dude from, the Balkans, right? So I've always had this comfortable distance from wherever I'm at. And I mean, maybe that's my sort of like, blankie that keeps me intellectually and like morally secure, is that like, I have this built-in distance to everything. So, I have like a sympathy towards like, where I'm from, and language has a big part of it. And I've been going back there summers and et cetera. And, obviously, it ain't easy to watch what people do to each other for whatever cause, especially if you're familiar with the region and, you're familiar with places and you see the destruction when you come back in the aftermath and the rest of it. But it's that distance is always built in somehow.
Yeah. And
for me, that's all.
Presumably you're yeah.
Not always.
Yeah. Well, so here's an example too. I mean, so there's a senior Muslim Brotherhood official who actually just died today. Hassam Larian is his name. I knew him, so he was someone I interviewed, and for my PhD dissertation, but also then for my first book, and it's weird. There's something weird and disembodying a little bit about someone who you knew dying presumably prematurely. I don't know the full details about what happened, although the Egyptian regime is trying to spin it in a particular way. But he died in prison, and not super old. He was born in 54. Okay. 54 means what? What does that mean? That means like mid-60s.
12 years older than me. So mid-60s. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Wait, 12 years older than you.
Well, no, wait. 54?
No, wait, come on, Damir.
54? Oh, yeah, 20
he's
20 years older than me. Yeah.
I'm like, whoa, Damir.
I don't know. Whatever. Age comes at you quick. Go on.
Yeah, but then like all these figures that you would interview. So I interviewed also, I got to know, not particularly well, but I interviewed him a couple of times. Mohamed Morsi, the obviously former president of Egypt during the Arab Spring, died last year. First elected president and all that of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's weird. First of all, it's kind of unusual and slightly surreal to have gotten to know someone before they became the president of a pretty big populous country.
Yeah.
An important country, at least, for some people, Egypt. That's weird. But then also that he died because there was a coup, and then he got, was pretty much like, doomed to life in prison.
Yeah.
So there's, you try to get your head around all this stuff, and then at the end of the day, you're like, oh, well, these are also real people. They might have been terrible politicians. They might have been immoral or bad people in various ways, and people can debate all that. But there's also like a human cost that we're talking about here, and that, a generation of Egyptians, tens of thousands of people who will have graduated from prison and their lives will be forever affected by that experience. The tens of thousands more who are stuck in exile, many of whom I also, know in Istanbul and other places, who I also interview for my work. It's a lot of families torn apart, a lot of human beings affected at a profound level, and they'll never be the same again. I mean, there's just something kind of sad about that.
Oh, I mean, I'd never quibble with with the inherent sadness of something like that. It's just that it's the default in so many ways.
Yeah.
And it's just,
but I guess it didn't have to. So there's a sense of regret and like it didn't have to be this way. I can imagine counter histories, counterfactuals, alternative ways of imagining the Middle East where this didn't happen. And then you look back at the moments, the week leading up to the coup, and we didn't think it would turn out this way at the time, but there were all these competing histories that could have happened if certain individuals had made different choices at different moments. A lot of this history is contingent. Like nothing had to be the way it was.
Yeah. I mean, I think counterfactual history is interesting and important, but I always sort of maybe assume that when things work out the way they did, that in fact there was a preponderance of, like, it's not everything's so contingent. That is to say, there's always a preponderance of reason, and that reason is human nature. Why things turn out as bloodily and terribly as they do. And that, contingency is obviously there. And at any one point, you can always imagine the 5,000 different decisions that could have been taken a different way. But that, any set of affairs is the way it is because humanity. And therefore, that's why I generally end up taking sort of, foreign policy and international affairs that seriously, and I approach it from the inverse way from the way you approach it, which is not let's figure out how we can build a better world. This is not to say that we oughtn't try to, if there's an opportunity to improve things, but it's to assume that things will naturally go to shit, will naturally lead to the worst possible outcome. So prudent statecraft is avoiding.
So why can't
that.
we stop it though, Damir? If that is the natural course, and there is one country that has the ability to intervene and prevent those worst case outcomes, why can't that country do that?
Well, I mean, because it's tried several times, I think, in recent memory, and made a hash of it.
So let's do better.
Okay. I mean, this goes back to a while in our discussions. It's like, why are we so bad at it? It's not just a matter of will. I think it's these things are very difficult. So yeah, I mean, again, as we had that discussion about human rights, probably a year ago now. Well, no, we just started this about a little more than a year ago, but probably 6 months ago, and we're discussing Libya and all of that. I don't have any kind of weird moral case against preventing genocide. My case is one of a knowledge and that we should always keep in mind is, in fact, how circumscribed our knowledge is of any one situation, and the kind of lift it's going to take to actually create a better society. Now, again, if you remember in those discussions, I granted you, it's like, okay, if we know that a genocide's about to happen and all it takes is to say, destroy all of Assad's helicopters and ground them and then just leave it at that, and we're comfortable at just leaving it at that, and the geopolitical implications of just leaving it at that are something we're fine with, yeah, I don't have any sort of case against you. I just think that in the frame of world betterment, a lot of bullshit gets smuggled in.
Well, look,
a lot of wishful thinking gets smuggled in, and a lot of belief about our ability to create societies. It's not create societies, but in fact, even to improve societies. I'm deeply skeptical of it. Yeah.
I don't want a better society. I just want a society.
Okay.
So for me, it's about I've moved to a pretty minimalistic view. I don't want there to be egregious repression or mass killing. People can do whatever the hell else they want, and that's why. Well, maybe it is asking a lot to say that countries should be somewhat democratic and people should be able to have agency and choice and select their leaders and all that. But after that, as long as they have those basic rights, I'm willing to kind of leave them be. I just don't, because I believe that repression has such a distorting effect on the human spirit and the human person. For me, it's more of a intervening to prevent that rather than some kind of affirmative vision of what society should be or what it can be.
Yeah. Well, that just gets back to the sort of religious question. I mean, I note again that our friend Christine sort of talked about human potential, or I forget what words she used, but sort of in similar terms. It wasn't dignity. I forget. I don't know. Just go back and listen, dear listeners, what she was saying. But it's yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't start from that premise of some kind of I don't know, human potential.
I don't even know if it's human potential. It's just humans being able to live without fear of being killed by the government's forces.
Okay, but again, that's a very modern conception you've got there.
Wait, but is that asking that much?
I mean, it's you said you want society. I mean, I think it begs a lot of questions about what is a society and how do you build it. I don't think you have the answers to it.
You don't think I have the answers to it?
Well, you might, but I don't think we as America do anyway. All right, Shadi, we've been at this for a good long while. This has been fun.
Yeah. You're like, I'm done with this.
I'm not done with this.
Shadi, seriously, man.
You want to go another half hour? We can go another half hour.
No. But wait, are we doing the bonus Patreon or not?
Yeah, we probably should do the bonus Patreon.
Wait, are we supposed to do that every week?
Supposed to. Who's
no, but is that what we promised our Patreon members?
I just think that it's one of those things that the more we do it, the richer we're going to be.
Content.
With all those Patreon members.
Yeah, how about this? Why don't we do, I don't know if I can do a long one. Why don't we do a nice short and sweet little bonus Patreon episode right now?
All right, let's do it. Okay. See you regular listeners.
Later. Bye.
Bye-bye.